Hey Magma friends, in our previous lesson, our instructor Ryan Allan covered the basic fundamentals of painting shape, form, and value in grayscale as well as in color. This lesson will continue on the path of painting essentials and provides more examples of defining key lights, bounce light, and painting reflected light in color. If you've been enjoying our content, subscribe, like, and fill out our survey in the description to let us know how we're doing and most importantly, what you'd like to see more of. Otherwise, stay tuned, as this is an episode you don't want to miss. Hey Ryan, can you hear me? Hey, just jumping in. It sounds like your audio just cut out for some reason. We can't hear you. Sorry, folks. Just give us a second. We're just getting started. Ryan's all ready to go. We got a bunch of stuff prepped. Just want to make sure we get the audio check good to go before we jump in here. Hope you guys are doing well. No worries. Take your time. For those of you that are tuning in, hopefully you guys are catching up with the highlight. If you haven't seen before, we are picking up from a previous lesson, which you'll be able to check out inside of the YouTube description, which will link back to other videos. So this is a great series we've been cruising through. And you will be able to participate here later. You good, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
There we go. All right, you take it away.
Cool. Yeah. Actually, I will. I made the mistake. Sorry about that, guys. Like I said to Solomon, now I'm half awake, so things might be a little flimsy to start. Last time I remembered that I noticed only after the stream that I forgot to give people access to having their own layers so they could draw on the canvas with me. So I'm going to fix that up now, so you can add layers and all that. Is my screen being shared by any chance there, Solomon? No, it's not. There we go. Cool. Thank you. Cool. So you are welcome to join me on the canvas. Now I cannot. Solomon, maybe you can do this. If you can put the link for the canvas there, then everyone can join. Right, so yeah, I am going to be making notes, writing on the canvas, so don't go too wild. I have made an additional canvas, so you can shift over there if you want a bit of room, and I've put the reference that I'm going to be chatting about in a moment over on there. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a still life study, but let's first recap on what we've looked at so far. Okay, we did our basic shapes in grayscale just to understand. Whoops, let's zoom in. I'm trying out a very wonky setup here. And if you notice my canvas refresh from time to time, that's because the internet gods do not favor me. It will happen, and it is something I've just got to roll with. So we've looked at value and shape in our first lesson. Well, let's spell shape correctly. Where we broke down very simple objects into grayscale, very simple values and shapes, brightness, right? Values are your lights and darks. In our second episode, we looked at the same thing, but we upgraded the subject matter to an apple. And again, the focus there was breaking down our values into shapes and seeing things that way. If you start breaking down your subject into these more simplified shapes of light and dark, then it becomes a lot easier to just move through it and plot things down, get it done really quickly. Then in our last episode, we looked at color, and this is where things get interesting. All right, so let's have a look. I've got to look at my notes here. So we know from our last lesson that color has 3 components, right? We have hue, we have saturation, and we have value. Okay, so hue is kind of what we typically call color, which is this ring around the box on the top right. We have saturation, which is how intense or vibrant that color is, which is typically on the right-hand side over here of our box. And then we have our values shifting from light at the top, dark at the bottom. But there's another component, and that is temperature. So colors can have temperature, and this is more of a relative term. So a color with all these different characteristics of hue, saturation, and value can vary in temperature to the colors around them, and things will appear cooler or warmer depending on what colors they're adjacent to. Then the other aspect of this is that contrasting different hues, different values, different saturations, different temperatures can bring a lot more focus to your piece. The greater the contrast, the more it draws your eye, right? So black and white next to one another is going to grab your eyes very quickly, more so than 2 shades of gray that are quite similar, but not too much brighter or darker than the other. Okay, so then we also have complementary colors, right, which exist on either side of the color wheel. You can more or less draw a straight line, but it's not quite so simple. If we're going to take a color over here, let's make this a little bit bigger. We're not typically going to just jump directly across. It's going to be probably more of a green. It's not 100% here, but that's a pretty striking, visually attention-grabbing combination. What we're more likely to do is play around with the saturation of these colors next to one another. So if you're going to use complementary colors, which can help bring balance to the force, bring balance to your composition, we're going to play with colors in the region across the color wheel, but that are a bit more desaturated, so that it fits, it feels balanced, but it's not too intense. Okay, so this is where our reference for today is going to come in. I'll bring up the first image once I use this, and let's shift over. Come on, there we go. Let's make this a bit bigger. Okay, this is a very simple still life, right? We've got 2 very primitive shapes. I'm going to make another layer here. Come on, behave. There we go. And I'll get a nice bright color to work with. Cool. So we've got this very, very simple still life setup. We've got a sphere set on top of a cube, on top of a nice bright orange tablecloth. Now, looking at this, I don't know, to me this is a fairly calming composition. It does have a very strong color to it that really grabs your attention, but it's set in an environment of its complementary color, which is blue, bluish, blues. Okay, it's sort of variety of color and slight change of hues, but it's not. If we were to color pick here, it's not going to be, immediately the same color on the opposite end of the color wheel at the same value saturation ratio. It's, if we color pick on our background, hello, there we go. you can see how much more desaturated that background is. But it is distinctly blue, right? We know that it's a much cooler background. There's a lot of blue there. Same inside of our shadows here. So this is quite an interesting composition to work with. Now, if we're going to do a study of this, I'm going to get into the reflected light aspect, which is the main focus today. It's a more subtle thing. But let's first look at, if we're going to draw this, we need to first break down what we're looking at. I mentioned this in the last class. What our lecturer would often make us do before we start any kind of drawing of our live model or still life, whatever we had set up, was to spend a good chunk of time, pencils down, just looking at the subject, breaking it down, trying to understand what's happening. Because it's very easy to just look at what's in front of you and dive straight in. Okay, no, there's a circle there, and then there's this cube. Okay, cool. And then, which is fine to a point. Eventually, then, if you're not taking the time to really look and analyze and observe what's actually there, you start drawing and painting how you think it should be rather than what you're actually observing. And that's kind of a shift that needs to happen while you're learning. So let's break this down. As I said, we've got our let's bump up the opacity here. We've got our circle here. We've got our cube. So we know we've got these simple forms. And there's, looks like it's a square kind of table with this bundled cloth. We're going to break that down like that, divide it quite evenly in the composition. This little space on either side, we can easily edit that later and fit it in. And we've got a change of plane over here. Okay, this is facing upward, and this is facing us, sort of down. So that's basic. Didn't really need to spend too much time there. But where things get interesting is with the values and breaking things down into simple, a very simple value structure. So to do this, there are a couple. It might be easier to shift it into grayscale, right? As you train your eyes, you'll be able to see that, okay, this is obviously a lighter value than here, and be able to notice those changes, particularly when it comes to different colors, because different colors have their own values, their own inherent values. So it can be a little bit tricky to tell whether or not something is kind of, if there is a shift in value, if things start to blend together. So what we can do is shift this whole thing into grayscale just to make it a little bit easier for ourselves. And to do that, we have a nice simple feature in Magma. When you go to your view menu, we have show in grayscale. Okay. I've set a shortcut key to Q on my keyboard, just so I can easily, while I'm painting, just make sure that my values are right. Press Q, check. Okay, so let's work with it like this. The only thing is that this changes the entire canvas to grayscale, which I still want my pen to be in color. So what I'm going to do is instead create a color layer, a new layer set to color. I know I've gone over this before, but just for others who might be new here, and I'm going to fill this with a refresh, and I'm going to fill this with black. Okay, that didn't work. Why did that not work? When it refreshes, I'll lose my tool before sometimes. Okay, there we go. So it does the same thing. Color layer that's filled black on top of your reference, makes it nice and grayscale. This will just make things a little easier to break down. So let's have a look. I want to break things down to a very simple 3-point value scale. Normally I set up a 5-point scale. So I can do that now quickly. Let's do this, shift it down, do the same here. So normally I do a 5-point scale, but I want to do I want to start off with a 3-point scale. Starting off, you want to be as simple as possible. It just makes things everything easier in the long run. So I'm going to try and stick within these three, second, third, and fourth value, just to keep things nice and easy for myself. So we're going to have a local value, well, it's our mid-tone value. So our mid-tone value we're going to have a shadow value, we're going to have a light value. Obviously, our shadows are pretty easy to determine here. Let's make this a bit smaller. It's ginormous. We've got this shape here. Oops. Comes down here. And then over onto the cloth, we have a cast shadow. We have our form shadow on the side of the cube here. And it casts as well. The sphere casts a shadow onto the cube and then comes down to the form shadow of the sphere. This as well, this area, we're going to just group that all into one shadow. And that's another thing you're going to be grouping your values together, keep things easy. Then this is obviously quite light, that whole area. This is very light. And then we have our background, and these two are quite similar. Right? When we shifted this into grayscale, the tablecloth and the background wall look quite similar to one another. But unless I'm putting in a darker value there to distinguish the edge of the tablecloth, it becomes a little bit difficult to read. So for the interest of readability, I'm going to just quickly recreate this in grayscale. Let's see, I'm going to make a random color here in the background. Let's make this all bigger. Bigger brush. And I'm going to do this really, really small, just to, the size of my screen. It's like that in front of me. The size where I'm going to draw, because I just want to thumbnail it. Okay, so let's start with. I'm going to start with this. So here's how I'm going to break it down. I'm going to first make my brush smaller. I'm going to group my lights here. Okay. This top surface is also facing up the lights. This is what we can tell from what's going on here, right? With the shape of the shadows, or the direction of the shadows rather, we can tell that our light source. Let's go blue here again. Our light source is casting slightly at an angle this way. The curve on the ball is, what is this? This is concave, right? If I'm following it that in relation to that. So it's sort of set in the middle. So it's roughly in line. Our light source is very like even spread where the terminator is here. We have a, like sort of terminator line where the ball starts to shift away from the light. But this all looks fairly in line. So I'm going to say that our light, if we draw a line through here, maybe even more forward than that, and then draw a line up, we'd pretty much have our light source. Much higher up, but we pretty much have our light source. So I'm going to group these together. I can just actually paint over the reference here for the sake of this, make things a little quicker, because I want to get onto the light aspect. I'm going to group that. Let's make this a bit smaller because it's group that. I'm going to put all of this as my lighter of the three values. We obviously have. Should have just grabbed the correct color here. This is going to be our shadow. Okay, it's obviously lighter, but I'm just breaking this down, and I'm going to group my values here. Now that we've got a little bit of tablecloth in the background here, and we have our ball. Also has its shadow here. It has a little bit of casting onto there. And then I'm going to make the background post refresh. Ooh, that's happening a lot. I'm going to make the background the mid value. Now to keep things visible, let's make sure that here we can see that there's a sharp edge for our box. Let me zoom in here. Right. So I'd fill in this entire area just at midtone. And we have a pretty basic read now of what's going on. So if I were to zoom out, we could even put this, as much as it is dark, I can just drop this. But that simple breakdown tells me enough about where my light source is, what sort of shapes I'm dealing with, and I can plot things out just like that. Okay, so I will make this smaller. We'll shift it off to the side. So now I've got a basic understanding of values. Of course, it's going to get darker in some areas, lighter in others, and there'll be things to tweak. But this gives me a starting point. And that's kind of how we work. We go from a broad idea and then gradually refine our shapes as we go along. So what else is going on? I'm going to hide that. Let's look at the colors again. So now, one kind of wants to spend a bit of time just checking the different relationships. Not that one. There we go. Checking the different relationships between things. Hey, Starry Night Sky, thanks for drawing on the canvas. And while I wouldn't recommend color picking directly from your reference a lot of the time, we can just use our eyedropper to help us get a sense of what our values are like. Okay, so I'm just going to click and hold here. You can see obviously the tablecloth is has quite like a high value, quite saturated, very bright, sort of orange. But interestingly, we'd look at this tablecloth, and go, oh no, it's an orange tablecloth. It's never quite that simple, right? That's more of a yellow orange. We've got quite a high amount of saturation. And we can just shift around and see, obviously, like I mentioned last time, what the rule of thumb with color is that as we add white to it, as we desaturate a color, it tends to become cooler. So we can definitely see that going into the background. This is a white wall, right? But it's definitely much bluer. So there's maybe other things in the room that's causing that light to, or causing this wall to be blue. And we can just sort of shift around and just do like little comparisons. So what I want to check is, well, how does the shadow relate to what's next to it? Let's do this. How do those relate, those 2 points? How do these relate? How do these relate? Obviously, this is a very sharp distinction. How do these two things relate? How do these relate where the value looks to, the edges seem to disappear because the value is quite similar, right? That edge isn't very, very strong. How do these relate? How do these relate? This aspect too is pretty tricky. So all these things, you want to keep looking at what's going on adjacent to particular areas and where you're going to have your edges, so that you can define those better and define them correctly, because some things are going to have soft edges, some things are going to have very hard edges, and in some points, possibly like here, we might have some lost edges. Let's sip coffee. And this is one of the most important things I feel with painting, is these kinds of relationships. And it's a constant thing from the beginning of a painting right through to the end. You're going to be assessing the relationships between things. And as you build up, I'm not even painting. Why are you refreshing? As you're painting, you're going to put something down, and then you're going to reassess that relationship. You're not going to get it right away. In the same way, like I've just done this very simple value thumbnail of the piece. That's the basic relationships. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to refine those. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, this is actually a little bit darker than that, and start adding new values in or new colors. So always keep that in mind. It's a back and forth process. And at some parts of it, it's going to look ugly. So let's do the same thing now, but try and figure out a value system with color included. So roughly we kind of want to follow what we set out here. We're going to have a bit of a mid-tone gray blue. Our orange for the tablecloth is going to be quite light. The ball, this is a white ball. If we're going to simplify it as much as we can, you could pretty much say that this is a white ball that's being influenced by its light and shadow and its environment. Speaking of the environment, let's drop the opacity of this layer and see what else is going on here before I start making another thumbnail. Because this is where things get quite interesting. I'm talking about light bouncing around in the environment. That's possibly why the shadow looks so cool here. The other aspect of why it looks cool is that the light appears to be quite warm. So, and again, we can compare this by playing around with our eyedropper and checking the relationships between things. If we look at our hue value saturation box on the top right, you can see how in the shadows we're definitely on the blues, and we're definitely shifting to the warmer yellow oranges when we go into the light. Okay, so that's the lighting relationship I'm going to go with. Warm light, cool shadow. For this scenario, it's not always the case, but for this scenario it is. So what's the really interesting stuff that's going on here? You've got light coming in, it's landing on quite bright surfaces. If we've got a white ball, a white sphere, that's going to reflect light, right? Black surface is going to absorb that light. We're not going to see a lot of color bouncing off of it. But on much lighter surfaces, color does bounce, light does bounce. So we know that our light is coming from sort of up above over here and being cast down onto, okay, let's just draw a line roughly to where I think the positioning of the light is. So that's coming, obviously landing over here. It's definitely landing on here, but that white reflects light, right? So what do we notice happening? That in the shadows here of our sphere, this light is bouncing up into it and lightening that area. And then it fades out into the rest of the shadow. Same thing if you look closely down here. Light's coming down, hitting that cloth, and then bouncing all around. Okay, that's why we can tell it's orange, because that the color and light is bouncing. But that some of that light is bouncing back into the shadows of our cube. And we can see this color here is distinctly different from, the shadow up here. If we move again with our eyedropper all the way down, we notice how it lightens up and also changes a little bit in hue. It goes a bit towards the warms. So it's still quite saturated, but it's definitely a warmer hue. So we've got that orange bouncing into the blues, fading out along with the angle of our cube. So this is where things can really start to help your shapes have more interesting form and define the form much better and look more believable. Because of course, if I were to hold, I don't have any bright colored paper now with me, but if I were to hold a bright piece of red paper over here, you'd definitely notice that sort of red bouncing onto my face. It tells you a lot about the environment. It adds to the believability. So these are things you want to look out for. So if I'm looking at just this simple thing that I've done here, there'd probably be, let's shift onto the correct layer. There'd be a little bit of light bouncing in there. And this is definitely an over-exaggeration, but there'd be a bit of light popping in there, fading out. We don't really see it in this, but sometimes there's light coming along the side. But that's not the case here. There's not really much around bouncing back onto there. So we want to pay attention to what our light is doing in that regard. Now let's have a look here. Check my notes. Make sure I'm covering everything. Okay. Yeah, so reflected light. So I want to make sure that I capture this now in the next iteration. And to just, I can draw this, but let me show you another example. Same image, but with a bit more going on. Oops, wrong layer. Grab the right layer. Let's go down here. Now we've seen what's going on here with how light's reflecting. Now what happens when we add more objects into that space? Again, we can see. Let's do this. Okay, we can see before. Here the shadows were quite similar, right, on our ball and our sphere. Down here, that's definitely not the case, because now we have a very light object placed next to it. So, that's because of that. So maybe this layer will work. Layer management is a disaster. So now that light is coming down, bouncing off of the cone all the way along it. Get the brighter color. All the way along here and bouncing back onto the side of our cube. So the light is starting to change there as well, and the value is shifting with it because now there's light bouncing onto it. It's a subtle change. It's still very much a shadow area, but it is a slightly lighter value than what we had on the shadows of our sphere. And we can compare this. Right? Eyedropper is a very useful tool just for helping to understand your reference. And if we zoom in some more, same thing going on here. Now why is it black? Oh. Light bouncing here and bouncing back onto this shape. And it fades away as this area gets further away from the cube and is angled away from it. But here, very light. Then, when it comes to shadows, we've got this light coming off of here, right? Coming in this direction. It's casting a shadow down. We've got a nice crisp edge over here. But here the edge is quite broken up. It's quite soft. Why is that? And then we can compare here as well. This shadow is really dark. This shadow is quite a bit lighter. Again, that light that's hitting this side is bouncing into the shadows. So it's softening the edge of that shadow, but then it's also lightening the shadow area up a little bit. And just under here too, it's a little difficult to see. Let's go in a little bit more. We can see some orange where that plane turns and faces down towards the tablecloth. We're getting, draw on the right tablet. We're getting that light bounce from here into that underside as well. So it's not just a straight shadow. You can't just apply the same color all the way across for everything that's on shadow. There's some other interesting things going on. So a simple image like this, I love it. I love this image. It's so simple, but there's a lot. Once you start to look for these things and you understand what's going on with the environment, there's a whole lot of interesting stuff going on, and it's a lot of fun to paint as well. So that's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna do now. We're gonna paint one of these. Let's hide this. And you are, of course, welcome to join either on this canvas. I have set up another page as well if you want to dive in there. But what I want to do before getting into painting is I want to figure out the same basic value structure, but with color. So what is that gonna look like? So I've got an orange here that would be classified as our light. I've got an orange here that's in shadow. Shadows gain saturation. They're in this case we're going with a warm light, cool shadow scenario. So we could shift our shadows a little bit over to the desaturated side, not a lot. But for this, we're probably not going to do that. If we compare here, it all stays very, very saturated. And then with our light, we've got quite a white ball, but there's a lot of blue here. And we have obviously a lot of blue in our gray background. So I'm going to look for colors that sort of match that. If I look for a blue shadow, I'm going to try not to color pick from my canvas. I'm going to just try and find something that sort of works. Now, there's also this aspect of relativity, right? Color relativity. You want to look for a color that's fairly close to what you're looking for, and then start to base other colors around that. Not necessarily, in a sort of color picking exactly accurate way, but if I were to look for this blue, or if I have to look for this blue. It's probably a little bit towards this side. Let's say I'll do that. Blah, blah, blah. Let's make this bigger. Not that big. Okay, we can use that. Probably it does get a little bit more saturated in here. We have some nice color. Let me just shift that over a bit. So now I would know that, okay, if in the deeper aspects of my shadow, we're going for a cooler color scheme, I could shift maybe a little bit more towards the purples, drop down a bit, and base that sort of deeper aspect on that color. And the same with moving into the lights, but finding an anchor point, an anchor color, and then shifting lighter, warmer, cooler, darker, more saturated, less saturated, based on that, so that the relationships in your painting make sense based on the information you're getting from your observations, right? Okay, so if I look for an orange, let's see, lots of refreshes going on here. I know that orange on the top, okay, it's quite light. It's a little bit more on the yellow side. So it's not there. It's going to come over a little bit. And it's not super bright. Another little refresh. Now I have to go find the color again. La 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 la. Sort of up here. Okay, let's go with that. That seems close. Let's compare. Not far off. That was actually really, really good. So this is a good exercise as well, to start to understand what's going on with your color, because especially when colors are next to one another, it becomes, because of how we're perceiving things is based on colors next to one another, it can be difficult to isolate a single color on its own, pull it out of that environment, and correctly place it on your color wheel. Just takes training. And then from that orange, I know we've got a much darker, we've got our shadow orange here, so it definitely looks more brown. So we're coming down, and if we go this way, that doesn't quite make sense. It definitely looks quite a bit more red, so we can go that way. Maybe shift it a little bit towards cool by desaturating it. As much as shadows typically are much richer, much more saturated, we kind of just got to play around and see what happens. Could do that. That'll work. And then we've got our white ball. But it's not pure white. Let's go with this sort of eggshelly kind of thing, which we can hardly see over here. So I'm going to work with these colors to start. I know that this area here, definitely much bluer as it shifts towards the lights. So we'll get to that, but I want to keep things simple for now. Let's move this all the way over. Neaten up. There you go. And I try to do this to start quite zoomed out. You don't need to be like right in there with a tiny brush trying to like fill in everything. We want to get a basic structure. We don't need to be completely zoomed in for that. And I'm going to set this. Okay, this background was also, I forgot to add that. That's sort of like a mid-tone. So we come up a bit. It's definitely desaturated. And the blue is a little different. Let's go with that. We can start with that. That's fine for a mid-tone. So I'm going to make my very simple thumbnail. This is an important exercise to do when you're starting out. Just breaking things down. Now, how small is this? This is like half of my thumb. That's how big the thumbnail is on my screen, and that's how I'm kind of going to work here. So I'm going to, again, simplify. I know we've got, this is like a table. We can see the edges on the side, but I'm just going to draw a straight line over. Let's make that a bit bigger so that I can do this in as few strokes as possible. And stop refreshing. One wants to get brush economy down, and then technology says, no, we're going to make you repeat those strokes. Okay, so that's basic division there. Okay, we've got our shadow for the cloth here. Let's actually make that a little thinner. Then we have our objects. Now this square goes up to about there. Point comes down. Oh, it gets very difficult with a big brush here. But the edges sit just above the tablecloth. I'll take note of that. And I'm just going to fill in the whole color for now. The sort of local color, local value of that ball. Not perfect, but it's fine. This was our background color. Then we've got our shadow. Okay, let's try and keep things as few strokes as possible. Just like that. Onto the thing there. And then our cube also has shadow like that. And then we have the cast shadow. Just going out like so. And there we have the most basic representation of our reference and what we're going to paint. And that's enough to work from, right? That's enough to work from. If you want to enhance the values a bit, we've got, it's not quite as dark, but we've got a little thing here, sort of mid-orange. We've got our warm light here, so we can definitely go brighter, maybe a little bit towards the yellows. Put a little piece there. And comparing these two, right, the top of as much as we group these values together, the top of the cube is definitely lighter. So I'm just going to put that in like so. Right. That's as much as one needs to get started. And everything else is just sort of rendering, refining from here. So I could go into this. Maybe that's a little small to work with. Let's make this a tad bigger. Right, let's Control D. Shift all this over. How did I put these on two different layers? May not accidentally take over Radix layer. Nice to have you here. Another one of the Magma team joining us. Let's merge this down. And then I can copy that bit specifically. Sorry, just making some adjustments. Making some refreshes. Hey Zoppy, sorry, I'm only noticing your message now, a little bit late. Welcome, welcome. So now, yeah, take some time, to paint this. I'll kind of talk through a bit of what I'm doing as I do, but I would say, hopefully I've correctly explained sufficiently what's going on and enough for you to sort of get started with your painting. If you want to step it up, if this seems a bit too easy for you, then maybe go into the darker, not the darker, the assessing values at the same time, the more complex still life with a few more shapes, which I'll do next, but I want to do this first. Ooh, this is maybe a 30-second refresh. Let me try something. Edit application settings, disable graphics acceleration. Maybe this will help me. La 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 la. Okay, let's get into it. So now I can really start neatening up. Obviously zooming out, nice from far, but far from nice. And we zoom in. And I'm just using simple round brush. There's no need for anything fancy here. Normally I use a square brush, but I didn't realize that you might not have access to the square shape in your normal brush settings. Oh yeah, this refresh is pretty frustrating. So other things I'm noticing as we go along, if we look at the background of our reference, there's definitely a value and color shift in the background here. Okay, very slight value change, definitely a change in color. So I'm going to go with it being a little bit darker, add a bit more blue into it, and with a low opacity, low density, a decent size, just going to dab in there. Ooh, there we go. Just so I know that that's going to be slightly darker. And if I want to, again, enhance, you don't have to follow the reference exactly, but if I want to enhance certain edges to create some focus, bump up some contrast, then I can increase the contrast on areas where I want focus, increase contrast in light, change of texture, all these kinds of things will be able to bring attention. So here I might want there to be a little bit more attention. I'll soften it out so it's not too hectic, but just along that edge, it's definitely a change. One thing I forgot to mention when we're talking about light bouncing around is another thing you might have noticed in our background here, that the wall is also catching some of the orange that's bouncing off of here, right? So light's coming down, bouncing in all kinds of directions, and some of that is being caught on the wall. So the color here, still on the wall, as much as we kind of set that to a cool blue, it's definitely a bit warmer here. It's got a bit of orange to it. Same on this side. Okay, a bit darker over here, further away from the light, but still definitely has that reflected warmth on it. So all these little things are going to add some interesting elements to your painting. So let's get this down. We've got a change here. Are there any questions? Sorry, Starry Night Sky with your internet issues. Okay, it's the storm. Yeah, internet issues, story of my life. So to get this reflected light, there's a few different ways we can go about it. One is to, with a really low opacity, maybe low density as well. The refresh is to color dab from the surface where there's going to be a bit of a bounce, and again with a low opacity, put that in, because now it's still picking up on the blue, right? And this gives us maybe a rough bit of color to work on, and then I'm going to color dab that and shift it out. I actually want this to be a little bit more saturated, a little darker. That shadow overall is going to be darker. And I'm doing this way too soon. This is something you would do a little later once things are a bit more refined, but to maybe just to have the mental note there for yourself, one can put it in a little earlier. But I'm color dabbing from this and fading it out into the shadow. My shadow will be darker. I'll probably have to do this again, but just to demonstrate. So there it's subtle, but it's definitely there. And then on our ball over here, I did point this one out. Let's just refine this shadow. My horrible attempt at a sphere. We have a few things happening here. We obviously have a contact shadow, much darker, just on the base where the ball is sitting on the surface. Going to be the darkest point, but then it's getting a little bit of this light. But that light, again, using our eyedropper to analyze it, how bright is it really? Okay, it's hitting this really light surface, but as it does, it loses energy. It's passing into the shadows, and it sits at around a kind of mid-value space. If we compare with the rest of our ball, okay, sort of mid-value, gets lighter. Okay, so as much as it's hitting a bright space, it is light. It's not going to be as light as the top left facing part of our ball. It's going to be more of a mid-tone value. So I'll just do that again. It's a little bit darker than. There we go. Okay, that'll do for now, just to explain what's going on. Could neaten all of this up substantially, and even make the cloth come up a little bit more. La 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 la. And now to get some of that orange passing onto the back wall. Again, low opacity, low density. I'm just going to just dab a little thing there and fade it out. That's probably too intense, but like we do, we kind of go back and forth all the time. The blending side, low opacity. That's what you need, low opacity, sometimes low density too. Don't really need to go with low density. Doesn't matter, that's your flow. It's a bit too intense. Although I have set it to pressure. And then fade that out. If it's too much, dial it back. If you go over too much, color pick again. Go back and forth until you feel that it's right. So again, if I zoom out, I can see, okay, cool, there's light there, there's light bouncing. Getting a little bit of that. There is a clear edge on the tablecloth, but there is also some of that reflected light going in. Let's make this a bit lighter. Where are we at for time now? Maybe, okay, 8:52. Oh, yeah. I'm going to be a little quiet on my end for a little bit and try and smooth things out here. I'm also looking, when you do start trying to get accurate about things, you'll notice a little bit of, in the shadows here, there's quite a color shift. It's a bit redder. So I might want to bring in bits of that so that it's not just straight shadows, only that color. All these things are going to be made up of a bit of variations. So let's go. So keep everything small. There's this corner over here. That's got some red to it. A bit in there. But it should be darker. I'm still trying to keep if anything, while there is a shift in the color and there are some redder tones, I want to still try and follow the values and not shift the values too much. My shadow here definitely needs to be darker, which I did plot already. Let's do that. Zoom in. Definitely darker here. And I can fade this down. Because I'm noticing that these, remember, like I said earlier, these two edges kind of blend into one another, so I want to keep the values quite close. We don't need much attention there. We don't need to define that form, that part of the form too much. Even go a bit darker. If we look here, the shadow is really dark. If we get really up close on the reference here, you'll notice that if we squint our eyes a little bit at it, we've got that light bouncing. We've got that light bouncing off the tablecloth, and then, oh, jeez, I think I'm gonna have to start looking for a new internet provider. This is mental. Okay, so the light's coming down. It's bouncing up. And if I make this a little bit smaller, we squint our eyes at the shadow side of our cube here. That orange, it's maybe a little bit off. It's not like that orange is all the way along the bottom. Right? It's sort of like it fans out from a point. But there is a little bit of an edge here. Let me erase it. You can see again. There's a very soft edge or transition between the shadow right along the bottom, close to where the contact shadow is, and then into the warm reflected orange over there. Nice. Glad you're finding it relaxing watching people paint. Okay. Yeah. So all these little things that you start looking for, like, oh, that's why that's happening. Oh, there's a slight change. These subtle little bits that start to make an image really interesting. So if you start doing the same with your painting, it makes for much more pleasant viewing. People might not be able to put their finger on it, but they're like, wow, there's such a nice quality about this painting. Even if it's just a bowl of fruit, which we're going to get to. We come back to our basic shapes here, but soon enough we'll have ourselves a tutti fruity painting party. We'll paint more fruit. Oh, I used to judge still life painting so hard when I was young and stupid. Now I'm just a little grayer here and there, and still a bit stupid. Let's soften this transition. Now, if this was something else we could start talking about, is materiality. If this ball was metal, then the way it reflects light is going to be very different too. I'm just talking, you don't have to really watch for demonstration. But this is quite a matte surface, so the light spreads quite evenly over it. So depending on the material and depending on the material receiving light and the way that the light is being cast, the type of light that's there, the way that all looks on your form is also going to be different. A matte surface is not going to be reflecting as much, and likewise it's not going to have a very hard highlight, right? Like if I were to go extreme here with a white, it's not going to have just this single, you can't even see it here with my values being so high, but it's not going to have just this hard highlight on it. It's going to spread out. Same if you have a diffused light. If you have like a normal desk lamp, a typical Pixar animated character lamp, it tends to be quite like a direct light. But then what a lot of YouTubers use in their studios. They have this diffused, they have something to diffuse the light, to spread it out so that you don't have those harsh highlights. It spreads the light over the face or over your subject. So all these things you can tell from just looking. Let me try to be neater about things here. I'm making a horrible mess. That's not right. It should be darker for the contact shadow. There we go. I've just got a contact shadow here on this. So maybe I'll play with a bit of a halfway to black kind of thing. I'll shift it a bit cooler. And add, whoa, that's a bit extreme. Add that in there. And you know what? We can fade that out a little bit because I'm playing with really high ratio of brush size. Just as I'm thinking the refreshes are going easy on me. Happens again. There we go. It's probably a bit too much. Push it back a bit. Back and forth with low opacity and density just to get some control over the whole thing. Okay. Zooming out frequently just to make sure everything's looking all right. I'm going to push this a little bit more into the yellows. Oh, loud. So yeah, that's pretty much as I need to, I think, share with you on this. I would encourage you to try and tackle the other still life that we have here as well. I'll set up a couple of extra canvases so that you can, if we have people joining in at a later stage, then you can also make use of that. This comes in here. Now I'm going to look for some of these other shapes. That's extreme. Let's go back. And keep to one brush. That's always good. Wes Gardner he's on YouTube and all the other socials. He describes his method of things for trying to get his paintings to look more traditional as the gauntlet method, and it's really helpful to get a more traditional look by behaving like a traditional artist, setting up the same sort of limitations where you have one layer, right? If you're working on a canvas, you can't have multiple layers to switch between and test things out. One layer, you can probably switch up brushes to a degree, but not go with anything fancy. No undos, and I think there was a third thing. No undo, one layer, and bugger, maybe it was just one brush. There's the third thing. But yeah, there's a lot you can do with a single brush. If you're painting on canvas, it depends on how you hold it, how much pressure you apply, how you turn it. Here we can play with all these different settings to change things up. I can't see my reference. And if you like some of the settings that you put up for a particular brush, oh, there's an interesting shape here actually. Just underneath the cloth over here, well, not underneath the cloth, on that change of plane, we have a bit of a darker triangle thing there. If you like the settings that you've got for a brush and you know you're going to switch to it frequently, you can start making use of the the preset functions here underneath your color wheel. So if I'm happy with how I've got my brush set now, I can leave it, switch over to another preset, set some settings, and then bounce between those two just using the numbers on my keypad. Quite useful, especially when if you're just trying to do, simple value studies, or if you set up like a 3-point. I do this with some of the exercises that I do where I'm using the lasso brush, the lasso full, where I'll set 3 different presets. One to my shadow, one to my midtone, one to my light. And instead of just finding everything, I'll just flick between those instead of always changing it on my color wheel. Of course, I can color pick as well from what I've done already, but okay, that's a bit too dark. Yeah, glad the visual aspect is making it easier to understand all these things. Starry Night Sky. Oh yeah. Now with all the refreshes, I got lost in what I was trying to do, which was to make this all a little bit more yellow. I know this is extremely messy right now, but trying to talk in paint is a challenge in itself. Nope, now it's changed again. Nope. I'll come back to that. Let's make this lighter, bluer, because I want to accentuate that a little bit. Flag that in. Drop the opacity and blend. And you'll go back and forth. If you decide like, no, I want that to be bluer, I want it to be more intense color difference, then you can, oh jeez, you could just go in and keep changing. Let me try something here. Let's see, maybe this cable is part of what's causing the problem. Shift to full Wi-Fi mode. La 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 la. Why does it say no internet? Okay. Let us see. Maybe this is an improvement. And pay attention to the edges of your shadows as well. Because I mean, if I look at the reference, as much as I drew a really hard edge here, it's not. When we look at the reference, you can see that surface isn't perfectly flat. And there's a little bit of softness to the edge of that shadow. It's not a very smooth gradation across the whole area. There's just a slight transition. Okay, I guess that didn't work. Let's go again. But I feel like that shadow is even more orange. So let's go saturate it a bit more. Smaller. Just a little bit. And then here, there's definitely a change of value that fades out from here. Let's come down a bit more. Ooh, music. Thank you for that. Okay. Solomon playing DJ in the background there. Let's neaten that out. If, like me, you are struggling to keep a very hard edge, obviously part of it is because of the opacity and density levels I'm using, but you can make use of your selection tools. Right, if I want there to be a hard edge down here, I could have used the lasso tool as well, but this will be fine because I just want to focus it. And I want here to be much stronger edge. And to make sure that the other side is also right, it's neaten up. I'll invert that selection, color pick, just run along here. So now with that, I've inverted my selection where I made this one, I'm not able to paint into it, right? But it helps just to get a nice crisp edge. So now that's super straight. And sharp edges like that are going to, again, help to draw your eye, draw your attention. For a lot of the painting, you might not want to have very sharp edges, which is a topic unto itself. Edge control takes quite a bit of work and a lot of knowledge. Such gaps I am also trying to fill. I think part of my problem is smooth this out a bit, make it bigger, this a bit darker. Feel free to ask questions as you're going along. You can plug them into the stream chat or on the canvas chat. I should spot them. I don't like how muddy this is. Let's push that away for now. Actually, this could be a little bit darker, a bit cooler. It's a bit much. And you'll probably notice doing this just how subtle changes can make such a huge difference when you drop that paint in. That should be more desaturated. Let's go back here. I want it to be slightly darker here. Probably change up my tools here now that I don't need to show my cursor too much. Maybe that'll make things a bit easier. madness. If you're finding it helpful to do simple still life studies like this, you can also go to sites like Unsplash, Pexels, Pinterest, search still life photo study or something to that effect, or painting study. I think if you put in painting, you're going to get images of painted still lifes, and see what comes up. There's quite a variety of things, sometimes nice elaborate still lifes, but sometimes nice simple stuff like this as well. Credit to the photographer who took this. Oh, it's hidden. Let's see. TRQXY, the credit of the image. Don't know who or what that is, but I think this is such a great one for studying. Let's dab a little bit of that orange in. Color pick it. Let the refresh happen. There we go. I should make these edges much neater. It's a bit embarrassing when I zoom in. Now I remember with our background here, this table goes off into the distance. That's even a bit bigger. Oh, everyone's paintings are looking really good. Nice on Roddick. And Nexus. Very cool. Very, very cool. This could even be a bit of a darker blue just towards the top here. I'm constantly stepping back, or zooming out rather, pinching to zoom out, have a little look at how things are reading overall, comparing with my reference, okay, well, I need to change this and that, and then making decisions every time. Like, okay, well, does that need to be bluer? Does that need to be darker? Does it need to be light over there? Whole lot of decision making. Can make your brain hurt pretty early in the morning. Like, there is that warmth there. I think it needs Let's be a little bit bolder. Check a big orange over here. And then blend it in. If you've noticed, traditional painters sometimes just take a blob of color and just smack it down on the canvas where they want it to be strong, but then they just blend it out. Blend it out. So now at least it shows through a little bit. I'll do the same on the other side. Nice big low opacity drop. And go back over it. That's because it's a bit intense. Blend in, blend in. This could be it's a little lighter here. Oops. Drop this value down. Let's do that. Like I said in one of our previous lessons, and earlier today, I think when you have a color, what it looks like next to something, it's going to make it look completely different. Here it looks very dark, but that same color and value, when I bring it into the shadows, looks much lighter. Let's just keep those relationships in mind. Oops, little canvas flip. Let's neaten up this edge. It's distracting me. You know what? This shadow could even be, at least with my screen brightness, a little darker. It's gonna saturate it a bit, or maybe not saturate. Let's just drop the value. Just a little dab in there. Here as well. And then I can blend that in. Definitely need to do is soften this. Much lighter. What is this? This ball should be sitting a little bit more forward. I gotta correct myself. Create other problems. Let's have a look at our reference here before I make the next move. So interestingly, so I'm looking at the reference. We've got that light bouncing on the ball here, but there is also a bit of orange coming through from the tablecloth. So as much as it's picking up this, we've also got a bit of orange to bring in. Maybe I'll color pick a little bit of that same reflected warmth that's in the other shadow and just drop a little bit of that in there. And then we can smooth out. So many beautiful little details to play with. Let's deepen this shadow, I think. I think it must be much deeper. Yeah, everyone's doing all right with these. Yeah, very impressive stuff, guys. Very impressive. I should probably talk less, paint more, so I can catch up a bit. Same with this tablecloth. The transition here is not super strong. Because it's a bit rounded. Alright. So it's not going to be a hard edge transition like we have on our cube. And even here, we've still got a bit of this orange that bounces up into this part. It's subtle, very subtle, but it's there. Maybe shift it a bit. Go strong at first, and I'll push it back. Here. Interesting, interesting. Nope. What's our time? 9:30. Definitely need a nice light blue in here. Let's probably desaturate some more, I would say. Yeah, you're absolutely welcome to ask questions now. We're just hanging out and painting. I don't have much to explain from this point. I think that covers the explanations for this lesson. So fire away if you've got questions. How to shade characters. Wonder if this is something that Udi will cover in his things. Well, the main thing to start, I would say, with that is figuring out the basic shapes of the character. Even if you want to make that as simple as cylinders, cubes, triangles, cones, whatever, and then obviously you're stacking all those shapes and then trying to stay consistent with the light source. If you shade each of those individually to get a bit of an understanding of it, and then piece them together and stay consistent with your light source, easier said than done. But yeah, one of the other things, if you're going realistic and you're trying to shade something like skin tones, a lot of people make the mistake of just going with, they look for like a fleshy skin tone on their color, the color sliders, and then just apply that uniformly across the face. Let's say we're just doing the face, but the face has lots of changes. Sometimes there's obviously like more blood flow, for example, in the nose and on the ears and around the eyes, around your mouth. So those areas tend to look a bit redder. So you want to keep things interesting and more believable. You want to be adding in different colors or some changes to your colors. When it comes to stylizing, then it's different, but then you're also stylizing that variation of color down to something simpler. So some cartoony characters, they just stylize the shapes, slightly redder kind of nose, slightly redder ears. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's look at my reference here. It's quite a bit darker down this side. Shift it towards. Towards the walls. But if you're doing stylized characters, I'd approach it this in a similar way to what I did here, where I found the basic forms. Let's see if I can find this layer. Scroll down. Oh, there we go. I have lost it. Not that one. It's this one. Yes. Well, here I just simplified the forms. I know we've got a whole. Hey. We've got a whole sphere here. But then I just simplified the shadow to being obviously consistent with the light source, but just this kind of half moon sort of shape. Okay. If the light source was different, at least with, okay, now I'm going back to this exercise in our characters, but if that light, so far we put that light slightly forward, falling on that. If it was further back towards the back of the ball, you might notice that terminator shifts around after the refresh. That it changes like so. Still following the form of the ball, but placement is different because the light source is different, or the placement of the light is different. So if you've got quite like a round character, let's say Mike Wazowski from Monsters Inc. Little round character, very simple, but very sort of round. You might, to do a stylized version of him, just having that kind of like half moon shape on him, do a slight transition, smooth those out ever so slightly, and just keep going that same kind of way. And the same things apply there. If it's in a, think about the temperature of your light source, what sort of environment is it in? I mean, if you're placing a character in an environment, there's going to be, if the walls are painted violet, perhaps that has an impact on the color of the skin. If the room is lit and that light's bouncing off, then skin tones are going to change and everything. So as much as we're going for a realistic thing here, all the same principles are going to apply no matter what you're painting, whether it's stylized or simplified, stylized or realistic. It's just in varying degrees of how much you apply these things. What's going on in here? $9.39. There's even a bit of If you feel like challenging yourself with this, doing another round where you change the temperature of the light source, and therefore your shadows as well, to be like a cool white, blue white, and then shift your shadows to the warmer side. They'll probably be a bit browner. Color on the tablecloth will be maybe a little bit more desaturated, depending on what the light's doing. Oh dear. And always remember to drink water. What have I done over here? That makes no sense, Ryan. Come on, get your shapes right. If things aren't looking right, it's one of the first things you want to do. Check your shapes, check your values. Switch to grayscale, see how things are looking. Is that fitting that initial... Oh, it's actually pretty cool when you switch to grayscale and see how everyone's stuff is looking. Check how your values look, how those relationships are based on your first observations. Are you still sticking with that and the decisions that you've made along the way? I could probably go a little bit darker over here, or further up. That gauntlet method was no eraser, no undo, single layer. Those were the three things. Oops. My general practice with layers is I create a new layer to test something out, and if I like it, I merge it down as soon as I can, as soon as I'm ready to, and I've committed to that decision, just to keep my layers nice and neat. All the more important when you're on a shared canvas like this. I think when we start doing some material studies, the whole thing of variety of color will make a little bit more sense. To make something look believable, like even a ball of iron, as much as it's grey, there's more to it than that. It's most often a more blue-grey, so you want to bring in those bits, and depending on the scratches and how it's been pulled out of the ground and weathered over time, there's going to be areas that are maybe a bit oxidized and get a bit orange. You start noticing all these little things. People definitely get to that. If you're eager to learn different materials, check out Jonathan Hardisty's course on schoolism. Really awesome course. So many different materials it takes you through. How to do different metals, how to do different skin tones, bit of lizard skin, sunburn even, and tattoos. So I can make this all look a little neater. And even slime, you do some of the, and you do sphere tests like this, right? You do spheres with all these different materials. And there was one on slime and blood and all those good things. Understanding what light does on those types of materials. Rockin'. Well, I think we can call it here. Painting for a while. Like I said, if you want to step things up, you want to challenge yourself a little more, move on to the next piece of reference, or try changing the color temperature. Or stay with the same color temperature and change the color of your objects. Then you work with that relativity thing quite a bit more. I need a break from this this constant refreshing. Oh, bugger. Let's see. Solomon, are you there? Shall we wrap things up?
I am here. If you're ready to go, I'm sending out final messages right now.
Okay. Yeah. I think we're done here for today. Awesome job, everyone. Your pieces are looking really cool. Very nice progress made. And I'm definitely gonna have to start bringing more challenging subjects to you guys. But we're going in baby steps because some people were catching this afterwards, and I know especially playing around with color, it takes time. And now even me trying to figure out these lessons, remembering a lot of stuff, and kind of relearning the whole thing of how to paint certain things. It's quite a bit of fun.
This is a great lesson. We just dropped in a survey in the chat. If you would love to give us your feedback, we would really appreciate it. Definitely share this one. This series has been really incredible, Ryan. It's been great information watching you in the background as I was DJing for a little bit there.
Thanks, Allan.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Have a great week.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.